It all started with a simple shift change. My boss, Roger, had been acting weird for a while, offering me more opportunities at work, complimenting my progress constantly. It seemed like he had taken a particular interest in me. At first, I thought it was just professional respect. I mean, I'd worked hard for years, always going the extra mile for the company, and Roger seemed to appreciate that. But in retrospect, it feels like that admiration was only a mask. Then there was Sarah, my wife. We had been married for 8 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had a routine: work, dinner, movie nights on Fridays, lazy weekends. Our life was quiet, predictable, and safe. Or so I thought. We had moments when the spark would fade, and I'd notice how distracted she'd become. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd brush it off with a smile, saying, "Just tired from work." I trusted her. I had no reason not to. One Friday evening, my buddy Greg and I were grabbing beers after work. It was a typical night: banter about the office, the usual complaints about workload, and then out of nowhere, Greg dropped a bombshell. "Look, man," he started, hesitating like he wasn't sure he should continue. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. It's about Sarah." I blinked. Sarah? What about her? Greg leaned in, looking like he was holding on to something he didn't want to let go of. "You know Roger, right? Your boss." "Of course, what about him?" Greg took a deep breath. "I think something's going on between him and Sarah. I've seen them together, not just at work." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, say it was some kind of joke. But Greg wasn't the type to mess with something this serious. My heart sank. "You're saying they're, what, having an affair?" He nodded grimly. "I'm not 100% sure, but the way they've been meeting, it just doesn't seem right. I saw them at that little cafe downtown last week, sitting way too close for a normal conversation. And they left together." The room felt like it was spinning, but I couldn't let it show. I just kept repeating to myself, "It's impossible. Sarah wouldn't do this to me." She couldn't. But I couldn't shake the image Greg painted. A quiet cafe, Sarah laughing with Roger, leaning in too close, her hand maybe brushing his. Suddenly, all those late nights she had, her phone always on silent, her subtle defensiveness, made sense in the worst possible way. I didn't want to believe it, so I didn't. At least, not yet. But something had already shifted in me, and from that moment on, I couldn't stop the growing doubt, a doubt that would soon unravel everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Greg's words kept playing in my mind on an endless loop. I lay next to Sarah, watching her breathe quietly in the dark. She looked peaceful, completely unaware that my world was collapsing. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if Greg was right. If it was true, how could I have missed it? How could she have done this without me realizing? The next morning, I decided to confront her, casually, without letting on that I was suspicious. Over breakfast, I asked about her plans for the day, trying to act normal. She was making pancakes, humming along to some tune, the same way she had 1,000 times before. Her voice was light when she answered, "Oh, just the usual. Maybe some errands. And a girls' night with Lisa tonight." Why? The lie was so smooth. It hit me like a punch to the gut. She had no idea that I already knew. I wanted to scream, wanted to demand the truth right then and there, but I held back. I needed to be sure. If I blew up without proof, she'd deny it. Maybe gaslight me. Maybe I'd never know the full truth. So I just nodded, pretending to be engrossed in my coffee. "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice steady, though inside I was screaming. "You guys going out for dinner?" She shrugged, flipping a pancake. "Yeah, probably. I'll be back late. So don't wait up, okay?" My heart sank further. I nodded again, forcing a smile. "Of course. Have fun." When she left for her so-called girls' night later, I made my decision. I followed her. I stayed far behind her car as she drove, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I expected her to turn toward Lisa's house. Instead, she took a left toward downtown. I could feel the anger rising, my pulse pounding in my ears. Where was she going? 15 minutes later, she pulled into a parking lot by that same cafe Greg had mentioned. My stomach dropped. I parked down the street, hoping she wouldn't see me. As she got out of the car, I saw Roger step out of his black SUV, right on cue. He was smiling, that easy grin that made everyone at work think he was just a charming guy. But now, seeing him with Sarah, it made my blood boil. They didn't notice me. They were too focused on each other, too comfortable as they walked into the cafe together like they'd done this 100 times before. I sat there, my mind spinning in disbelief. The woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was now sitting in a dimly lit cafe with my boss. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I wasn't ready to face them. Instead, I waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, they left together, laughing. And then I saw it. Roger's hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. My chest tightened, and I felt the air leave my lungs. This was it. This was real. The betrayal was happening right in front of me. They got into Roger's car, and that was when I made another choice. I followed them again. I wasn't sure if I was ready to see where this would lead, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know everything, no matter how much it hurt. As they drove out of the city and toward a hotel on the outskirts of town, I realized there was no going back from this. Whatever was happening between Sarah and Roger wasn't just some innocent friendship. This was a full-blown affair. My heart shattered as I watched them disappear inside the hotel together, arm in arm. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, numb, as the reality of my life came crashing down around me. She wasn't who I thought she was. And now, I had to decide what to do next. I sat in my car, staring at the hotel where they had vanished. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes or hours, but everything blurred into one gut-wrenching moment. The woman I loved, my Sarah, was inside with another man, sharing moments she used to share with me. It was like a movie, except I was stuck in the worst role imaginable. I wanted to storm into the hotel, rip her away from him, and scream every question that burned inside me. Why him? Why now? Why us? But my hands were frozen on the steering wheel. The truth had paralyzed me. I had been so sure of us, sure of her, even though the signs had been there. Her phone glued to her hand, the late nights, the secrets. I had refused to believe that she could betray me like this. But now, seeing it with my own eyes, I felt like I'd been ripped apart from the inside. After what felt like an eternity, I finally turned the ignition and drove home, numb. My mind kept cycling between disbelief and anger, sadness and rage. How could she throw away everything we had built for him? My boss, of all people. I spent the next few hours pacing the house, trying to figure out what to do. Every corner of our home felt like a cruel reminder. Our wedding picture on the wall, the couch where we used to cuddle during movie nights, the bed we shared. Now, everything felt tainted. Should I confront her? Wait for her to come home and let her explain herself, knowing every word would be a lie? Or should I disappear, leave a note, and vanish from her life just like she was vanishing from mine? The thought of leaving crossed my mind, but a deeper part of me, the part that had spent years loving her, the part that believed in the vows we made, wanted to stay. I needed to hear her admit it. I needed her to look me in the eye and own up to the destruction she had caused. Later that night, I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The front door creaked open, and there she was, walking in like nothing had happened. She smiled when she saw me, but I noticed something different, a slight nervousness behind her eyes, a crack in the mask. "Hey," she said, her voice light, "you're up late." I forced a smile, pretending not to know, pretending everything was fine. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." "How was girls' night?" I asked, casually. Too casually. I was testing her, waiting for the lie. "Oh, it was fun," she replied without hesitation, heading toward the kitchen. "Lisa and the girls had a lot to drink. I didn't get home too late, did I?" The lie hit me harder than I expected. She stood there, pouring herself a glass of water like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't just with him, like she hadn't crossed every line. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the tidal wave of anger rising inside me. I wanted to confront her right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was the need for more proof. Maybe it was the desire to make sure she couldn't wiggle her way out with half-truths or excuses. Maybe, deep down, I still hoped there was some other explanation. something that would make this all go away. But I knew that wasn't true. I had seen it with my own eyes. And now, I was stuck in this horrible waiting game, pretending everything was fine while I gathered the courage to shatter the lie once and for all. I lay awake that night next to her, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like 1,000 bricks. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real, and it was happening. The only question left was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, Sarah moved around the house as if nothing had changed. She hummed while making coffee, smiled at me as she passed by, completely unaware that my world had collapsed. I could hardly look at her without feeling sick. The casualness of her lies, the way she acted so normally, it twisted the knife deeper. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, trying to decide what to do next. My mind was in chaos. Every fiber of me wanted to shout the truth at her, to demand why she would betray me like this. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, not yet. I knew I needed a plan. I couldn't just fly off the handle and lose control. I had to be smart. I thought about following her again, seeing if she'd meet Roger again that day. Or maybe I should confront him directly. The idea of walking into his office, grabbing him by the collar, and telling him to stay the hell away from my wife was tempting, but it wouldn't fix anything. Not really. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would strip away any lies or gaslighting. That way, when I confronted Sarah, she wouldn't be able to deny it or twist the story. I had to be sure. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. After Sarah left for work, I rummaged through her things. I felt sick to my stomach as I went through her dresser drawers, her nightstand, the pockets of her jackets. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe a hotel receipt, a message she forgot to delete, something. But I found nothing. I was about to give up when I realized there was one place left I hadn't checked, her phone. She had always kept it close, locked tight with a password I didn't know. But that morning, she had left it on the bathroom counter while she was in the shower. I had a small window of time, and I knew this was my chance. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone. I tapped in her birthday, no luck. Then our anniversary, wrong again. I tried one last time, my heart racing. The passcode was her mother's birthday. The screen unlocked. It took every ounce of restraint not to go straight to her messages, but I knew I had to be quick. I scrolled through her apps and found what I expected, hidden chats. Some messages were already deleted, but enough remained to piece together the whole story. There it was in front of me. Messages between her and Roger, disguised under a fake name, filled with flirtatious exchanges, plans to meet at the hotel, jokes about how clueless I was. Every word felt like a hammer smashing into my chest. The photos, they were worse. Selfies, intimate moments shared with him that were now burned into my memory. This was it. Proof. There was no denying it now. I barely had time to process what I was seeing when I heard Sarah coming down the hall. I quickly put the phone back where I found it, heart pounding in my ears. She entered the room, smiling like she always did, completely unaware of the rage brewing beneath the surface. "Everything okay?" she asked, pulling on her coat. I forced a smile, the bitterness boiling inside me. "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. It was far from fine. As she walked out the door, heading off to spend the day with him, I knew what I had to do. This charade couldn't go on any longer. I had all the evidence I needed. Now, it was time to confront her, to break through the lies once and for all. I spent the rest of the day planning my move. I called my friend Greg, the one who had warned me about all of this in the first place, and told him what I had found. He was furious for me, offering to come over, but I told him I needed to do this alone. This was between me and Sarah. By the time evening came, I was ready. I sat at the kitchen table, the messages and photos printed out, waiting for her to return. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a hollow numbness. She would walk through that door soon, and when she did, there would be no more hiding. This was the moment of truth, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come next, so I sat there, staring at the pile of evidence in front of me. I could feel the tension in the air. The house was eerily quiet, and I was lost in the silence, my mind playing out every possible scenario of how the confrontation might go. Would she deny it? Break down in tears? Try to turn the blame on me? I had no idea, But I knew one thing. Tonight, everything would change. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the crunch of gravel under the tires signaling her return. My heart pounded in my chest as the front door opened. I didn't move. I just sat there, waiting. "Hey, babe," Sarah called out, her voice cheerful. "I picked up some wine for us." "Thought we could." She stopped short when she saw me sitting at the table, the papers spread out in front of me. I didn't say a word, just stared at her, waiting for the moment to sink in. Her face shifted from confusion to something else. Fear, maybe. She placed the bottle of wine on the counter, her smile faltering as she glanced at the stack of papers. "What's all this?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You tell me." She hesitated, her eyes scanning the pages. She still didn't know what I had found, but she could sense something was off. "Is this about work? Did something happen?" I picked up one of the printed messages, holding it up for her to see. "This is what happened." Her face went pale. She took a step back, her eyes wide as she realized what I was holding. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, there was only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. "I followed you," I said quietly, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "I saw you with Roger. I saw you go to that hotel." She blinked rapidly, her hands shaking as she clutched the back of a chair for support. "I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Explain what?" "That you've been cheating on me with my boss for God knows how long? That you've been lying to me every single day, pretending everything was fine while you've been sneaking around behind my back?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she took a step toward me. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think." I cut her off, standing up from the table. I grabbed another sheet from the stack, this one a photo of her with Roger, her smile wide and carefree as they stood together, arms around each other. I shoved it toward her. "This is what you've been doing. This is the life you've been living behind my back." Her face crumpled, and she reached out as if to touch me, to comfort me, but I recoiled, stepping back, my hands shaking with anger. Don't touch me." Tears streamed down her face, and she started to sob. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen. It just got out of control." "Out of control?" I laughed bitterly. "That's your excuse? You don't accidentally sleep with someone for months. This was a choice, Sarah. You chose to do this. You chose to destroy us." She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "Please, just let me explain. It's not what you think, I swear. It wasn't about you. It was, I don't even know why it happened. I was feeling lost, and Roger was just there. I don't love him. I don't even know what I was thinking." The words felt hollow. Everything she said sounded like an excuse, a desperate attempt to make this seem less catastrophic than it was. But it was too late for that. The damage had already been done. I looked at her, feeling nothing but numbness. Why him? Why Roger? She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "I don't know. I honestly don't. It started as just, I don't even know. He was always complimenting me, making me feel good when things were rough at home. It felt harmless at first, but then it just went too far." "Too far?" I scoffed. "You think?" "I'm sorry. I really am," she choked out, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I replied coldly. "You destroyed us, Sarah. You destroyed everything." The weight of those words seemed to hang in the air between us, suffocating any hope of redemption. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, but her tears didn't move me. They felt like a performance, like the tears of someone who wasn't crying because she was sorry, but because she had been caught. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding as the finality of it all settled over me. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "I can't do this anymore." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, please, don't say that. We can work through this. I'll do anything, I swear. Please don't leave me." But I was already gone. Something inside me had broken beyond repair. I turned away from her, walking toward the door. "I'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow." You need to pack your things and leave. Her sobs followed me as I left the house, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. This chapter of my life was over, and there was no going back. I drove for hours after leaving the house. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't focus on where I was headed. Just away. Away from the memories, away from the betrayal. I ended up at a park on the outskirts of town, one that Sarah and I used to visit back in the early days of our relationship. Funny how life works sometimes. Here I was, sitting on a bench where we once laughed and dreamed about the future, now drowning in the ruins of our past. I stared out at the empty playground, thinking about everything we had built. The house, the years of shared experiences, the love I had once thought was unbreakable. But it wasn't. It had shattered under the weight of deceit. And the most painful part wasn't just that she had cheated. It was that she had turned our life into a lie. A text came through, breaking my thoughts. It was from Greg, my friend who had warned me. Greg, how did it go, man? You all right? I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Was I all right? No. I felt like a part of me had died tonight. But there was also a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't living in the dark. The truth, no matter how brutal, was out in the open now. I replied simply, "It's over." I told her to leave. Greg's response came almost instantly. "I'm so sorry, man. Do you need me to come over? We can grab a drink or something." I thought about it. A drink would help dull the pain. But I wasn't ready to face anyone yet. I needed to process everything on my own. "Thanks, but I just need some time." "I'll hit you up soon," I replied. The numbness in my chest grew as the night wore on. The reality of divorce, something I never thought I'd have to deal with, began to sink in. Our marriage was dead, and now I had to figure out how to untangle my life from hers. It felt impossible to imagine a future without her, but what other choice did I have? The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah tried to reach out, texting, calling, leaving voicemails begging me to come home, to talk things through. I ignored them all. Every message felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the betrayal I couldn't forgive. I stayed with Greg for a few nights. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence. That's what I needed. Someone who understood that nothing could fix this, that there was no magic word or gesture that could undo the damage. I hadn't gone back to the house since that night. The thought of seeing Sarah, of being in the place where we built our lives, felt suffocating. But on the third day, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to start dealing with the practical side of things: lawyers, the house, and splitting our lives down the middle. When I arrived at the house, Sarah was already there, packing her things into boxes. She didn't say anything when she saw me, just wiped at her tear-streaked face and continued packing. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we wanted to say but couldn't. She packed quietly, occasionally glancing at me like she was expecting me to stop her, to say something that would change the course we were on. But I couldn't. I headed upstairs, packing a few things of my own. Every item I grabbed felt like a relic from another life, one I couldn't go back to. The next step was finding a lawyer, something I dreaded more than I expected. Divorce. The word still felt foreign on my tongue, but it was unavoidable now. I made an appointment with a lawyer a colleague had recommended, a no-nonsense guy named Martin. His office was cold, filled with framed degrees and bookshelves lined with legal texts. "So, you want a divorce?" he said flatly after I explained the situation. "Do you have any evidence of infidelity?" I handed him the file I'd compiled. The texts, the photos, everything. He flipped through it, nodding slowly. "This is more than enough. In our state, infidelity gives you leverage in terms of division of assets. Have you two discussed any of this yet?" I shook my head. "No, we haven't. I've barely spoken to her since I found out." Martin sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know this is hard, but you need to protect yourself here. From what you've told me, she was the one at fault. That gives us the upper hand, but it won't be easy. Are you ready for a fight?" A fight. I wasn't sure I had the strength for one. All I wanted was to be done with this mess, to move on, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. I nodded. "Yeah, I'll do what I have to." We agreed that Sarah would move out while the divorce proceedings were underway. The house, our home, wasn't big enough for the both of us anymore. I came back one evening to find half the closet empty, her shoes gone, the scent of her perfume no longer lingering in the air. It felt strange. I had wanted her to leave, but now that she was gone, the silence in the house was deafening. I walked through the rooms, each one filled with memories. The living room where we used to watch movies late into the night. The kitchen where we'd dance around while cooking dinner. And the bedroom. The place where we once shared our most intimate moments, now just a cold, empty space. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. How had it come to this? We were supposed to grow old together, build a family, live a life full of love and laughter. But now, it was all gone, and I was left picking up the pieces. Over the next few weeks, the lies Sarah had told me began to unravel. I started hearing things from mutual friends, stories I hadn't known about. Apparently, Roger wasn't the first. There had been others, men she had flirted with, maybe even more, during the times I thought we were happy. Every new piece of information felt like another punch to the gut. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted with my life, had been betraying me for longer than I realized. It was like I had been living in a dream, and now I was finally waking up to the ugly truth. How much of our marriage had been a lie? How much of it was real? I questioned everything, but amidst all the pain, there was a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what came next. I wouldn't let her lies define me. I had to find a way to move forward, even if the path ahead felt impossible. The day the divorce papers were finalized was surreal. I met Sarah at the lawyer's office. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from crying. For a moment, as we sat across from each other, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Martin laid out the papers, explaining the terms. We had agreed to split the house, the savings, and all our belongings. It was all business, cold and detached, a far cry from the life we had once shared. I signed my name, feeling the weight of it, like I was signing away everything we had built. Sarah hesitated before signing, her hands trembling. "I never wanted this," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. "But you did." She nodded, her tears falling onto the paper as she signed her name. And just like that, it was over. The weeks after the divorce were a strange, painful blur. I went through the motions, work, sleep, repeat. I saw less of my friends, avoided places we used to go together. It was hard to rebuild a life from the ashes of a broken marriage, but I had no other choice. Greg checked in on me regularly, encouraging me to get back out there, to start doing things for myself. It was easier said than done. How do you move on when the person you thought you'd spend your life with turns out to be a stranger? But slowly, painfully, I began to heal. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and even started going to the gym again. I had to remind myself that life didn't end with Sarah. There was a future out there, even if it wasn't the one I had imagined. Months passed, and the pain began to dull, replaced by something like acceptance. I wasn't over it, not by a long shot, but I was starting to see that life went on. One evening, Greg convinced me to go out with some coworkers. I wasn't in the mood, but I agreed, figuring it was better than sitting at home, drowning in my thoughts. That night, I met someone. Her name was Emily, and she was nothing like Sarah. She was kind, easy to talk to, and didn't carry the weight of my past. We talked for hours, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, genuinely laughed. It didn't feel like love, not yet, but it felt like hope. And that was enough. One day, months after the divorce, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. She looked different, tired, sad. We exchanged polite hellos, and for the first time since everything had happened, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel much of anything. As we stood there, awkwardly making small talk, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. I ruined us, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just needed to say it." I nodded, not really knowing what to say. "I appreciate that," I finally said, "but we're past that now." We stood there for a moment longer, and then I walked away. I didn't look back. It's been over a year since the divorce, and life looks different now. I've moved to a new apartment, started seeing Emily more regularly, and, For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on solid ground. The pain of what Sarah did will always be there, a scar that reminds me of what I went through. But I'm no longer defined by it. I'm more than just a man who was cheated on. I'm someone who survived, who rebuilt, who found a way to move forward despite the wreckage. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful. I'm starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's a second chance at happiness out there for me.